The Power Factor Show with Steve and Rick. Episode 22. 22 conversions.
Gun Rights Radio Network has the best pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun rights podcast available on the net. The podcasts are absolutely free when subscribing using iTunes or Zune Marketplace. Or if you want, you can just listen from the website. Make sure you visit gunrightsradio.com to subscribe. Podcasting freedom, one episode at a time.
Welcome back to Power Factor Show. I'm Rick.
I'm Steve.
And one of the things that's become a reality for shooters, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, has been the price of ammo. Especially if you're dependent on factory ammo, you're not a hand loader, and you're going to the store, and you remember the days of, like 2006 when you could get 100 rounds of 9mm ball ammo for $12. Last time I went shopping for 22 long rifle ammo, I paid almost that for 100 rounds. I mean, it's gotten really kind of crazy. But one of the things you can do now that the prices have started to drop a little bit, is you can fire a lot more rounds downrange for less cost and get a lot of the benefit that you do from shooting your centerfire guns by shooting rimfire. And with ammo prices, again, kind of dropping back to reasonable levels where you can get like a 500 round bulk pack box. What are those running now?
About $18.
Yeah, and so that's pretty reasonable. I mean, my hand loads, 45 hand loads, are running about $10 for 100 rounds, maybe $9 for 100 rounds, even at the elevated prices that we're paying for primers and powder. But if you like to do live fire and you want to get 90% of the benefit at less cost, you can shoot a 22. And there's tons of 22s on the market. Just here's an example of a real popular model, Ruger Auto. This one is nice because the plastic grip frame is proportioned, not exactly, but very similarly to a single stack 1911.
Actually, Ruger makes something called a 2245
with replaceable grip panels,
which it has the same grip, angle, feel, everything as a 1911 for those people who want to have a similar feel of going out and doing some more practice with a gun that's similar to a 1911. That is a very alternate or a good option for doing that. I was going to say one thing in addition to your comment about ammo availability and whatnot. I don't buy factory ammunition or reload my own stuff, but last year I could not buy a primer if my life depended on it. And if you did, it was like $40 or $50 for 1,000 primers, which is nuts. Mm-hmm. So that to me was kind of the push over the cliff, so to speak, that got me into considering going and doing 22 practice for a lot of my range sessions, just because of the fact that I could not get my hands on any primers, and the primers that I did have, I was basically holding in reserve for being able to build match ammunition. Yeah.
And so if you want, now, of course, if you're shooting a single stack 1911 style pistol, this is a good kind of a trainer in terms of the, replicating the size and feel of the gun. A lot of guns now have 22 versions. Like I was just reading about how
M&P has a 22 version of their popular M&P 9 or M&P 40.
Exactly, and there's a company making kind of pseudo Glock knockoff 22s, so you can find good kind of training pistols. But if you're shooting something like a high cap STI, SVI, something for which there are no kind of corresponding 22 caliber pistols on the market, you can convert.
Get a conversion unit. And the same thing applies for your 1911. And I think the attraction of a conversion unit is that you are experiencing literally the same trigger feel, the same trigger press, the same grip, the same everything, basically everything that your hand is used to, or at least what your feel is used to or whatever. And all you're doing is changing the top end of the gun. For the 1911 market, there is a plethora of different conversion units out there. There's Signer, Marvel, who is it? Advantage Arms, Tactical Solutions, just a lot of different companies that are making things, and some of them are branded or rebranded. Kimber, right, by somebody else. So, in terms of conversion units, last year I made the decision to go and buy a conversion unit for my STI. Now, in terms of the wide body guns, it presents a little bit of a problem, not so much from the slide, but from the standpoint of the magazine. So these are, I use a Tactical Solution conversion. They call it 2011, but it's not 2011 as in the 2011 STI 2011, but it's kind of like the 2011 as in
100 years better than the 1911.
Actually, maybe they call it 2211 or something like that. But at any rate, the idea is 22. And the upper will actually fit on a standard 1911, but the difference is the magazine that you get with the kit. So this magazine will actually hold about 15 rounds. It runs best when you don't load it up that high, so I typically run 10, 11, 12 rounds or so in it. These things that are built like a tank, you get one of these magazines and take it apart, and you'll be amazed at the machinery that they put into in this magazine. But they're not cheap. In fact, nothing from Tactical Solutions is very cheap. In terms of cost, this conversion here is probably somewhere around $400 or so just for this alone. So you're looking at, I don't know what the Ruger Mark IIIs go for these days, but probably
less than $400.
Yeah. But the advantage is that I get to run the same lower on my gun. So literally the conversion goes like this. I pop the slide stop out, pull the top end off, put the Tactical Solutions top end on, take the same slide release, put it in, and oops. I wonder if I've missed it. Yeah, right. Timing this? Yeah, good. Okay, now I thought I missed that. Hold on.
It's really easy.
Yeah.
It's really easy. If you've done it more than a couple of times, you can just put it on there. It only takes like 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, we'll try it again. You can go ahead and talk while I'm doing this.
So Steve's putting the Tactical Solutions 22 conversion unit on his
missed it
STI.
the first time.
Oh, here we go. Okay, there we
There
go.
we go.
Okay,
So-
there we go.
So you'll notice one thing here is that the dust cover is overhanging the end of the slide, and these are typically designed for your standard 1911 where you have the stirrup cuts here and you don't have that problem, but it doesn't cause me any issues. It may look kind of funky, but whatever. The other thing with the Tactical Solutions upper is that you can get is it Picatinny rail? Is that what they call it? Whatever.
People call it that. I believe it's actually an M1913 rail.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. At any rate, so you can put one of those. You can get the gun with that installed, or the slide with that installed. So you could put like a red dot optic on there or something like that. In my particular configuration, I had the same Bomar style. However, this one's made by I think Champion is the rear sight. And again, I've gone with a fiber optic front sight, so I'm seeing the exact same sight picture that I am with my standard STI sight assembly.
Now it looks like you have an easily interchangeable front sight there.
Yeah, I can.
So if you wanted a plain black or
right,
white
I have
dot,
it, right.
There's
a screw here. I can take the screw out, slide the front sight off, put a different one on, and change that. But the idea here basically is that I'm now running the same lower that I'm used to here, with the same trigger pull, the same everything that I'm accustomed to here using my standard upper. The magazines, again, pretty straightforward here on that. The magazine will actually lock the slide back on the last round fire, but again, since I've modified my slide release, it doesn't do that on mine. The primary thing, though, is that when you are shooting or doing practice using a 22 conversion is that you really need to change the way you practice. Now, normally when you go out and practice with full power ammunition is that you are going to set up multiple targets and you are going to be firing 2 rounds on each target as you would normally with anything that you were shooting. So the difference that you need to really do here in terms of using a 22 conversion is because of the fact that the recoil is nowhere near anything that you would normally shoot with full power ammunition, is that typically the practice is working on things that would be related to your first shot or your last shot. So as an example there of your first shot, you're moving into a box. You get into the box, you have the gun up, it's the first shot that you fire. So you can work on using a 22 of moving into a box, running from position A to position B, moving in the box, putting a single target up, whether it's steel, whether it's paper target, and fire that first round. Example of your last shot would be that you are in a box and you're working at moving from that box to another shooting location. So you're working on that last round that you're firing and then getting out of that position using what Travis Tomasi refers to as an easy break or a hard break, which we'll talk about in a future episode about shooting or moving from boxes and so on and so forth. But at any rate, so those are things that you can work on. The other thing that you can work on is transitions. So you'll have, let's say, a steel plate rack or a bunch of steel targets or a bunch of paper targets, but you're firing one round on each target. So you're moving from target to target to target. You don't want to get into a scenario where you're firing 2 rounds on a target, 2 rounds on a 2 rounds on a target, because you're experiencing recoil that in 22 that you would not normally experience in terms of full power ammunition. I think it actually degrades your practice by doing that. So you really need to work on, or the beauty of the 22, it allows you to work on, shooting on walls or shooting around walls or shooting through ports or moving into positions or moving out of positions or things like that, where you're really looking at basically that one round that you're firing as you're breaking in or out of a particular shooting position. And we will do some demonstrations on that at the range to really show you what we're talking about. One of the things that we actually did here recently, we went out to the range, set up, I referred to kind of a mini steel challenge course that we had 5 steel targets, and we designated one as the stop target, so you had to hit that one last, and we just kept on grooving that over and over. And I think between the two of us, we fired probably around 1,200 rounds of ammunition.
It was a lot.
A lot of ammunition, and we certainly would not have fired that much ammo if it was full power ammo. But since we're shooting 22, and this particular conversion unit is just fine with the Federal bolt pack. Like I was saying, I typically $16 to $18 depending on where you buy it. So I mean, a full day or an entire day at the range shooting at 500, 600 rounds cost me $18.
Right.
I reload for roughly $10 a 100, so that would have cost me $60 or so, give or take, if I was shooting full power ammo. So it's definitely a very viable cost alternative for going out and doing a lot of practice, but it really does help you work on specific things that's part of your whole entire shooting game that you normally see on stage. Is if you have problems on moving into ports or moving into walls or moving out of walls or things of that nature, that's really where the beauty of a 22 comes into play, of working on those particular areas.
But one of the things about the idea that you're maintaining your familiar trigger and grip and everything and changing only the top end, a lot of conversion units are a full profile slide that's made out of aluminum, because the puny recoil impulse of the 22 cartridge isn't sufficient to cycle a full-size slide. If you get a full-size steel slide, that is, if you get one of the Sieners or Kimbers or something that's got the full profile aluminum slide, it'll change the balance of the gun a little bit. Now, what Tactical Solutions did was kind of skeletonize it a little bit so that only this breech block part is reciprocating. So it cuts way down on the weight of the amount of what that puny recoil energy of the 22 is expected to cycle, but with a full profile barrel and the rib on the top end is very similar in weight to the full profile steel slide on your centerfire gun. So just something to, if you're looking at it from, both from the cost aspect, but also this idea of kind of replicating the feel of your centerfire gun, the steel conversion units are nice because they help maintain the overall weight and the balance.
Yeah, what do you have for?
Well, I've got the granddaddy of them all here. This is the original Colt conversion unit. It was introduced right before World War II, and then was reintroduced after World War II. This is actually a conversion of this style that they made around 1950, and mechanically it's the same as the ones that were made in the 30s and in the 80s. You can usually just kind of tell the general vintage from the sight configuration. But it's got a full profile steel slide, and the gun weighs pretty much exactly the same as a centerfire equivalent because of that. And it not only has the same weight, but it's a one-piece full profile slide, just like on a regular centerfire gun. And the way Colt was able to get away with that was using what they call the floating chamber, which is a 2-part barrel, and this gap that allowed the gases to leak out essentially formed almost like a piston effect, like you would get in a piston-operated rifle. And this moving chamber then amplifies the recoil impulse enough that it can operate the full slide, and also it increases not just the recoil impulse that the gun experiences, but that you feel when you're shooting it.
Yeah.
It kicks quite a bit more
It
than a typical 22 pistol does. So it gives you a little bit better replication of the center fire experience. But these are, even the ones that were made in the 80s, are pretty much collectible status. But even at that, in minty condition, they still don't cost much more or about the same price as the Tactical Solution.
So in regards to Rick was talking about, in terms of recoil, when we went out and did our little range session here recently, we swapped guns just as a comparison. And I was amazed at the amount of recoil that upper conversion presents. I mean, I don't know where they packed the gerbils in that thing, but I mean, it is stout, and you'd shoot something like this, and I shot something like that, and there is a considerable amount of recoil. And in fact, I think when you shot my gun, I think you knocked about, I don't know, like a second or so off your time that you were shooting when you were shooting that.
It was kind of funny. I had never shot Steve's gun before, and we were doing our timed runs, just a 5-round little clang, 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 clang kind of a deal. And the best time I shot all day was, I think, the second run I did with Steve's gun ever, and it was like a half second faster than the runs I was doing with my gun, having shot it all day.
It was more than that. It was more about 3/4 to a second.
And so if you're looking at, as the gun as a subcaliber trainer, it really does replicate shooting a centerfire gun to a little bit greater extent than that, and you can kind of tune that a little bit. I think this is a 10-pound recoil spring. And just like the centerfire equivalents, the lighter spring tends to shoot a little bit flatter. You can actually run these with a 14-pound spring, and that increases the muzzle flip quite a bit, and further, replicates the centerfire experience if you're trying to duplicate that. But this will fit on just about any frame. I mean, it was designed to fit on any frame, and it will. They don't have a great reputation for accuracy. They are kind of, you can do some of the same standard kind of tightening that you can do with a centerfire gun. This has got a match bushing on it. The barrel is locked into the frame by the slide stop, and tight fit there will help the accuracy. But they're still, probably like 4 inches at 25 yards if you look for ammo that's the gun really likes. With all the 22s I own, I look for ammo that functions. I find 22s in particular, rifle, pistol, fairly finicky about the ammo that they like.
That's the one thing about 22 is that it's like, it's weird that you wouldn't think it would be that big of a deal, but it seems like 22 is that there's a huge variation for whatever reason.
Well, I remember that day that we shot that 1,200 rounds.
Yeah.
You and I essentially swapped ammo.
Yeah, we did.
Because the stuff that you brought didn't work in your gun.
Yeah, one of my friends at work gave me some ammo, which I'm not going to name. And said
it's great. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
I think it was Winchester.
Well, I didn't say I was going to name it, but I didn't say you weren't. But it would not run in his gun. He gave it to me. It was like 500 rounds, and sure enough, it wouldn't run in my gun either.
Yeah,
but it ran fine in your gun. So.
And that's the thing that's kind of weird too, is that my gun is probably about 99% reliable. If I go to the range and shoot 100 or 200 rounds, I'll usually have a couple of either stovepipes or feed failures. And the day that we put 500 plus rounds each through our guns, I had one malfunction the whole day. So I might have, Steve won't name it, but I may have found the ideal ammo for my gun because the gun just ran like clockwork on that particular brand. And yet I've had others where, in 100 rounds, I've had 3 or 4 stovepipes or failures to feed. So,
and I found this like some Federal bolt packs. That day that we were shooting, I think I had 2 or 3 light strikes. Just I hit it a second time, and the light strike could be caused by, my guess, one of 2 things. One, I had the extremely light and hammer, and mass is where it's at in terms of hitting the firing pin to get it to go off. But behind that mass is the spring that launches it, and I have a 15-pound mainspring, which is 8 pounds less than stock. So not only do I have a light hammer, but I've got a light spring pushing it. So I had a couple, light strikes. Again, out of 500 or 600 rounds, 2 or 3 light strikes to me was no big deal.
And I think they're actually is at least at one time there was at least 22 conversion on the market that required that you change the mainspring because the recoil impulse wasn't enough to recock the hammer with a full power mainspring in there. And that kind of sort of defeats the purpose if you actually are going to convert them back and forth. The more hassle it is to do the conversion, the less likely you are to want to do it.
However, if you do run into that problem, and one approach I might take, in fact, I have taken for some crappy Wolf primers that I'm trying to burn through, is that I've taken...
My favorite primer, by the way. Yeah.
Is I have another mainspring housing with a heavier mainspring in it that I just pop this one out, pop that one on, and I can shoot the crappy Wolf ammo until I get through it. And then when I go back to my normal stuff, I pop that mainspring back off, put the other one back on, and I'm ready to go. And you're going to say, well, why bother? You know, it ends up lightening my trigger pull by about 1/4 pound. But I think a 3-pound change in the mainspring results in about 1/4 pound change in the trigger pull.
So this is kind of a cool gun. Well, I'll just return back to this for a minute, just because if you're shooting open and you want optics, obviously Steve's conversion, you can get a rail to allow you to mount an optic on it like this. This has got the rail mounted right onto the upper.
And what's that rail name?
It's an M1913.
Okay.
This one might be a Picatinny. I mean, I've done a little bit of. I mean, it's funny. The term Picatinny rail, my understanding is that it's a complete misnomer. That it's named after the Picatinny arsenal, which had nothing to do with the development of the M1913 rail, which actually was developed by a guy who'd worked for Colt as part of an improved M16 program, I think back in the 70s. But the government standardized the rail dimensions, the spacing on these cross hatches and stuff, and so it just about all the sights on the market are designed to fit on the M1913 rail. So you can get it. I think the Marvel conversion, which is somewhat similar to this, also you can get with a rail. Actually, I think they make one where you can have irons and the rail on the same
You
rib.
can do that with this too.
So anyway, so you can do your optics, you can do your iron sights. Easy to switch out the front sight to match. That's one of the things about this gun is that the sights don't exactly match any of the other guns I have. So that's one of the limiting factors. These are old 1950s style sights. The notch is fairly tiny, and I'm not going to cut on this, but if you get a more recent Colt conversion that's got the acro rear sight on it, there's a number of rear sights on the market that you can swap in there to change the sight picture. And that's important too. You know, you don't want there to be too glaring of a difference between the gun that you're training with compared to your usual match guns. If you can match the sight configuration, that's a big bonus.
I was going to say one thing that I thought was really cool is that my first exposure to the Tactical Solutions conversion was at Area 1, and the vendor came out to Area 1, and they had a Tactical Solutions conversion with a silencer on it, or suppressor, I guess we will actually officially call it. So one of the options they provide is the barrel with a threaded extension on it, and those of you who can actually legally possess and have paid the tax stamp and everything, or a suppressor, you can screw that onto the end, and it was a lot of fun to shoot that thing. And they had a setup of another 5 steel target course of fire, and yes, the can did add weight to the front of the gun, but boy was it quiet, and it was pretty cool. So the cool factor, it was interesting. Not really practical for doing training, but it did have the coolness going there. So we'll go through and do some exercises at the range of showing you some things about either just some drills or things that we can do or recommend doing for really exploiting or making use of the 22 conversion.
Are you ready for Steve's Power Tip?
Okay, so for this week's Power Factor Power Tip, we're going to talk about production and single stack divisions, really more specifically about trying to prevent a shooter from getting bumped from the division that they're in into, at least in IPSC terms, into open division. I don't know what happens. In IDPA, it's a little bit different. It's just a penalty that applies, right?
Failure to do right. It
Right.
could constitute a failure to do right.
The problem in IPSC is a little bit bigger in that if you're shooting production or single stack, you get bumped to open, so all of a sudden you're shooting against the guys using compensators and dot scopes and 30 rounds in their gun and stuff like that, which means there's no chance in hell that you're going to compete against those guys. So the issue comes into in terms of speak of the Barney magazine or the load magazine that people use. For those people who have 10-round magazines, typically the routine is going to be is that they have a loading magazine that they'll probably keep in their pocket or whatever. They'll load it into the gun, chamber around, put that magazine somewhere, grab one of their other 10-round magazines, put that in, and they're ready to go. They have 11 rounds in the gun, 10 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. The problem is that if they take that Barney magazine and they stick it in a front pocket, or like in your case, you have cargo pants and they drop it into that, the rule in IPSC is that all the equipment has to be behind the hip bone points during the course of fire after the start signal. So the problem is that if they drop that magazine, their loading magazine, into their front pocket, and then at the start signal start shooting, the fact that they have equipment that is in the wrong position in their body or on their body immediately bumps them to open division if they're caught by a range officer. So if you're going to go through that process of using a Barney magazine to load your gun, make sure that when you put it back in, put it in your back pockets, basically just everything away from your front. Don't put it in your front cargo pants or side pockets or anything like that that are too close to your hip bone points. Put it in your back pocket.
The real consideration in IDPA is that you're limited to the number of rounds or number of magazines you can carry. And regardless of the division, you're allowed the 1 magazine in the gun and then 2 reload magazines. If you have a Barney mag that's downloaded with a single round or has fewer rounds in the mags you intend to use during the course of fire, you can stow it pretty much anywhere you want, but you can't use that magazine. So put it someplace where you're not tempted to draw it. Stick to the magazines that you have properly stowed with the intent of using them. Get that Barney mag out of the way so it never comes into play.
The other thing Rick pointed out about using it, in IPSC, it doesn't matter whether you use it or not, just simply the fact that it's on you, on your body somewhere in the wrong position is what gets you dinged. So even if you just put it in the front pocket and you don't use it, it doesn't matter. The other half of this is that for people who have high capacity magazines, a lot of people in production will have their special loading magazine and they'll put 11 rounds in it. So that their load process, literally they pull the gun, load it, rack it, put the gun away, and they're ready to go. The other problem is though is that if you have courses of fire which are unloaded gun starting in your magazine or unloaded gun on a table or something like that, and they forget about this 11-round magazine that they've got sitting in their back pocket, they start the course of fire. Any magazine that you have on you after the start signal with more than 10 rounds will get you bumped to open division. So again, it doesn't even matter whether you go there or whether you use it or anything. This is simply the fact that you have it on you is what's going to get you into trouble. Now, more often than not, this really isn't, ROs aren't going to be walking around going, let me see your mag, or anything like that. The problem happens typically is when the guy ends up using his Barney mag as his start magazine, loads it in the gun, and the RO's counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, then it's really obvious that you just screwed up. So there's something to be aware of whether you're shooting production or single stack. Single stack, obviously, you have the Barney magazine issue. Production is a little bit of a different issue there because of the fact that we can put more than 10 rounds in some magazines if you have that capability. But just watch it in terms of unloaded gun starts for production, or after you go through your load process of where you put your magazines, because it can really create a bad day for you in a real quick instant.
And in IDPA, the issue again is failure to do right. If you've got an empty gun start, table start, with no rounds in the gun at the start signal, and you put an 11-round mag in there when you should have 10, FTDR, the only way that you're probably going to get caught is if you fire that 11th round. The safety officers will be accustomed to reloads coming at a specific place. When everybody else runs dry here and you don't, it'll be pretty obvious that you started with the incorrect number of rounds in your gun. 20-second penalty will pretty much ruin your whole day.
It's the equivalent of getting bumped to open.
Keep that 11-round mag in some place where you're always aware that, hey, this is the 11-rounder, and also just be mentally aware. I mean, I went to a match, or actually it was my match, I was a match director a year ago. 2 shooters came to the line and put that 11-round mag in the gun to start the stage after the start signal, and it's an unhappy situation.
Okay, so today we're at the range. We're going to do a little demonstration here on rimfire shooting. The one thing to remember with rimfire is that you can't really work on doubles or splits on a single target. A lot of this is single transitions from target to target, or moving into or out of shooting positions and things like that. So you really, when you practice rimfire, you really need to change the way that you're going to go about the practice.
Yeah.
Well put. Okay, so just a little warm up here. We're going to do a little man versus man here. We've got 2 toppers and 3 plates on a plate rack, so we'll do the first one and all of it.
Yeah, right.
Did you make ready?
I'm ready. Somebody say go.
Somebody said you said
Go! That plate's falling down. That's my 1% to 5% failure rate. You try it again?
Except my
I don't think I have a deal yet. What?
My plates all fell. They need to be reset.
Okay, we're going to take a little break and reset.
Rolling.
Are you ready? Stand by. Beep. 115s won't knock them down.
So one of the other drills I'd like to work on here is box-to-box movement of moving out of the box and into another box and looking at your shooting position in the box and also in the box. So we'll work on that here and just move back and forth here.
You want me to give me a range, man? You missed that one. Following along from what Steve said about, because the 22s don't have the same amount of recoil, it's not good for, build drills and double topping and stuff. But anything that requires single shots, it's great because you get that first shot up on the target, get your good sight picture, break the shot, and then the lack of recoil afterwards doesn't matter. So I'm just going to do a few draw and single shots. We've got beautiful weather here in the Seattle area today, so that makes it all the more enjoyable. And I could sit here and cheaply do this 5,000 times. I mean, that's the nice thing about 22. So it's just another one of those drills. Just draw one shot, just like Steve's transitions. Good simulation. You get the live fire experience. But that was nice. I don't know if I do that. And that's
reload with your eyes shut?
No. You shoot with your eyes shut?
Sometimes.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that's the end of
my secret.
Right, exactly. He's kind of that Zen kind of a shooter.
Yeah, don't even need to look at the targets.
Exactly. If you have any questions, comments about 22 conversions in particular, you can send us an email at powerfactorshow@gmail.com and or visit the website
at powerfactorshow.com.
So until next time.
See you then. Thanks for tuning in.